We've got some presets on our video, so you've got me for a moment, but very soon you'll have uh, the much more interesting Grace Leavitt from the Maine Education Association. In case you didn't notice it, some of the candidates in our opposition party and some of the articles in the news, some of the publications by political action committees are attacking our education system. And in by association suggesting that they're allowing entirely inappropriate things to happen in classrooms and innuendo about sexually inappropriate materials and all kinds of things. They're really disrespecting and harming the reputation of our teachers, our educators, everyone in the school system. So it seemed like now would be a good time with that out there for us to take up the subject of what really happens in our schools and what the people that are putting their dedicating their lives and putting a huge amount of effort for not enough pay, frankly. I know that about our teachers, many of them, most of them, to educating our children need decent representation to counter all of that. And so today, Grace, if I remembered it correctly, 43 years an educator, national board certified, which from my time on the education committee in the legislature, I know is a big deal. And you now have risen to the level of being the president of the Maine Education Association. So I can't imagine a better person to represent to you what is happening in our schools and what our educators are doing and what we need to do to support them and make sure that good education is what we're focusing on instead of tearing down our education system and our educators. So with that, I'm going to swing this to Grace and hand it to you. Welcome, Grace.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will, that's okay with everyone, just as I'm speaking, that might be a little bit easier for all. And I'll share my screen in just a minute. I have a bit of a PowerPoint, not terribly polished, just something I put together to help me stay on track and share some things with you. But first and foremost, thank you for having me here. Thank you for being interested in this topic. It is obviously near and dear to me. This is my life, being an educator, as Chris said. And it's not just about the educators, it's about our students. And so I would not want to lose sight of that as we talk. And so if you just give me a moment to share this, that will hopefully keep me more on track, because I can tend to meander a bit sometimes when I'm speaking. And let me get this going the right way here. And I'll go through some of these a little more quickly than others, and I have a few other notes to share as well. Before continuing on, how many people either on Zoom or in the room here, and by the way, this is really a great setup that you've put together for a hybrid meeting. We've been doing this for a while, but this is really well done. Thank you for that. How many folks have children in public schools right now or have had children in public schools? And I see a lot of hands going up, both on the screen as well as in the room. And also, are there any other educators here with us as well? Yep, we've got some educators as well. So please do chime in as well with your experiences. And a school board member as well. Yes, perfect. 2. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you all do. And thank you for paying attention to this topic. It is truly, truly near and dear to me. So as Chris said, I've been teaching for over 43 years, different levels. And I didn't set out to end up where I am now as president of the nearly 24,000 members of the Maine Education Association, but here I am. Figs lead you on different paths and journeys as you go along. And certainly I am very dedicated to our union. We had, as you can see on the slide, it's almost 24,000 members, pre-K 12 schools, as well as higher ed. And when I say educator, I truly mean every adult that works with students. It is not just teachers by any stretch. Hopefully everyone realizes the incredibly important roles of all of our support professionals, whether they're ed techs, custodians, drivers, all of them. They are all a part of a student's education and all important. And as well as our aspiring educators, those are the students that are studying in the universities to become educators as well. And so I just want to briefly share that our vision at the MEA is a great public school for every Maine student. And so that is what we dedicate our work to in supporting the educators who then support our students. We believe in the promise of public education that will prepare every student to be successful in their lives, whichever path they choose. We have core values. I won't read all of this to you. I just did want to share it though. Equal opportunity, a just society, democracy, professionalism, partnership. I will read that one. We believe partnerships with parents, families, communities, and other stakeholders are essential to the quality of public education and student success and collective action. And so just a little background first, going back to March 2020. And I will remember March 13th, as will I think every educator in the state, because that was the day that folks went home, only to be told things are going to be different for a while. And so even just the week or so before that, I'd been in a meeting with the school superintendents. We were included in that meeting and we were being told, you know, have folks plan some lessons for a couple of weeks because we're not sure what's going to be happening. So, yeah, so there we were. And obviously, our educators, I could not be more proud of all that they managed to do in the most impossible of circumstances. And so that pivot to providing remote instruction, very bumpy at first, of course, because we'd never done this before. And for the students that were not able to access things on internet, people were putting together packets of work for them, of lessons. And most importantly, we still provided meals for students. And so that was an incredible undertaking. And yes, it was really challenging, but again, we managed to carry on in the most impossible circumstances. That summer, people worked incredibly hard. We had educators working on planning committees, trying to figure out, okay, we got to do this better. We're not sure what's coming at us. It's hard enough to plan for what you know you're going to be doing and facing, but it's really hard to plan for something that you've never had to do before, and nobody has ever had to do before. But there was a lot of that going on, and also training on using different technology, different platforms, preparing lessons for remote instruction. Again, it was really a ton of work throughout the summer. And then the school year, as we all know, was sometimes remote, it was hybrid. Sometimes kids were in person, sometimes some of the kids were in person. It was very different things throughout the state, depending upon the sizes of classes, the sizes of the district, the schools. There were cleaning protocols going on that teachers had to wipe down desks in between classes when there were kids in school. And again, just huge hours, long hours of planning, preparing, and trying to still keep things moving forward for students. And remarkably, they did. Perfect? I don't think anything could be perfect during a global pandemic, but it was pretty darn good. And I really am very proud of all that was going on. Again, summer 2021, programs were being offered for students to help keep them supported and to help fill in gaps that were already happening, we know. And then the school year, people were saying within the first month that the next school year was even harder than the previous one, which was hard to believe. But I think everyone's expectations over the summer had been that, oh, things are going to be better now. And then we started having spikes in COVID cases. And so there were many disruptions still because of having to go remote, having students be quarantined, staff be quarantined, the shortages that were happening, just exhaustion on the part of our educators, and especially our ed techs, because they were being called on to cover because we didn't have substitutes, or certainly not enough substitutes. We hadn't had enough substitutes for years for our school district. So anyone out there who would like to be a substitute in schools, we'd appreciate that. It'd be great. But still, it was just an exhausting year. And the mask wars started at the school board meetings with parents that were very unhappy with that. And nobody's well, I have yet to find anyone who's happy to wear a mask, but it was a necessity to keep people safe. And so that was really something that was important. So we want to talk a little bit about those shortages. We've already mentioned, Chris already mentioned about teacher pay gap for Maine, it's about 24%. So if I'm a teacher, I earn about 24% less than someone with comparable degrees. And that's taking into account the days that I work, which I'll just a little sidetrack here. Teachers work over the so-called vacations and the summer as well. They just don't get paid for it, but that's besides the point. But still, that's something that needs to be addressed if we're going to really deal with these shortages. And we knew these shortages were there before the pandemic, but like so many things, the pandemic really exacerbated them. Wages for educational support professionals are way under what they need to be, especially when they're competing with places like McDonald's that has a starting hourly pay a lot higher than what many of our schools are able to pay. And so we need to address that. Respect for what we do for students, respect for the expertise and the experience that we have and the training that we have, that is really needed. And it's a profession that has not had the respect of the public that it deserves, at least not some in the public, I should say. By no means is it the majority, but showing that respect. And especially for our support professionals, again, realizing that they are so instrumental, so important in our schools. The workload, it has increased enormously for our educators over years, but certainly during this pandemic, it was even more so. Safety, not just from COVID and other things that happened in schools, but talk about school shootings. I get a lot of messages from our members whenever there's been one. And again, there was one just recently this week, again, in another state. And it's always in the back of our educators' minds. And so that is certainly another concern that needs to be addressed. Quickly also, the government pension offset, windfall elimination provision are Social Security offsets. So a lot of our educators, no matter their roles, they have second and third jobs to be sure that they have adequate salary and wages to do what their families need them to do. Yet if they pay into Social Security with those other jobs, which usually they do, and they're in the Maine retirement system as an educator, when they do retire, they pretty much lose all of that Social Security that they paid into because of the offsets. That's a federal law that we've been working for years to try to have repealed, and we will keep working at that as well. But it is discouraging folks from entering the education profession as a second career. And it just is another deterrent that we need to be sure we're taking care of. I have something else here, the hires to job ratios, hires to job openings ratio. We've been monitoring those. Our National Education Association, with which MEA is affiliated, sends us a monthly report. And it's basically showing us the ratio of the job openings in education and how many are being filled. And the percentage goes up and down a bit. Most recent report was for August, and it was a 56%. So just over half of the job openings are filled, and that just shows the shortages. This is nationwide. This is not for Maine, but certainly we are experiencing that here as well. There are a lot of good things happening to address these shortages in our for our schools. Maine Department of Education has been tremendous throughout all of this. With a lot of creativity. They had already started a program, Teach Maine, to attract more educators to our state. And so that's in the works. There was work done on revisions to the certification rules, not to lower standards, but to remove some barriers that were not really needed in order to have some people get certified that really were qualified to be certified. Again, not to lower standards, but to be sure that we are having reciprocity with other states, that the educators are just as qualified. There were some hurdles there that were revised a bit. Thanks again to the Maine Department of Ed, State Board of Education, who is responsible for that, and our Professional Standards Board, which is made up of educators in all different roles, and which for 8 years under the previous administration did not exist. Our previous governor did not appoint people to the Professional Standards Board. This is a group of professionals, educators, again, in all roles, who advise the State Board of Education. But for 8 years, we didn't have it. Now we do. The teacher residency project, there's one going at USM that is helping to bring educators into the profession and support them. That's a great project. It's just getting off the ground. And I do have an NEA report that just came out a few weeks ago. The title is there, that gives a lot of recommendations about addressing these shortages. So again, some hope for moving forward. This just shows the teacher pay gap, the percentages across the country. This is from the Economic Policy Institute. So you can see where Maine is. It's blocked on my screen a little bit because of the Zoom people here, but hopefully you can see it was at 24%, but you can see it, there's quite a range across the country here. So we have made a lot of progress in the past 4 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, thanks to our governor and our legislature and having a lot of great forward movement for public education. For the first time, 55% state funding for public education. There were a lot of hoots and hollers and yells of celebration when that was accomplished. And I truly am so thrilled because we've been expecting that since 2004. And so finally we did get there. And again, I want to thank our governor and our legislators for having reached that at last. It's definitely making a difference. Free school meals for all students. So the federal government was providing that throughout the pandemic, but that ended in September of this year. But again, our governor, our legislature is providing that in Maine. We are one of 2 states. Maine was the first. California, I guess, did it a week later. They passed it as well. And so again, I couldn't be prouder of that. So not only does that ensure that our students are not hungry, and if anyone has ever tried to teach math to a hungry student, good luck. But all of our students have free school meals. It also removes the stigma of someone who perhaps before had a free and reduced lunch. And so they would have, a meal, but it would show, they'd be a little embarrassed about it sometimes, often. And sometimes families wouldn't even apply for it. And so again, it's removed that. It's made a huge difference in student behavior. In terms of being sure that all of our kids are fed nutritious meals. And something that I just heard that hadn't even occurred to me, another plus, local farmers and our fishing industry as well, that are providing some of the food for some of those nutritious meals in our schools. So it is great. So I hope we can keep that going forward as well. We did get the minimum teacher salary raised to a minimum of $40,000, also a big step forward. There were a number of improvements made to the pensions for educators, helped to undo some of the damage that was done under the previous governor. Some of the setbacks, still hasn't undone all of it, but it's a good step forward for that. And certainly student loan relief is a huge help for those that are entering the profession and continuing their education when they are already in the profession. And one thing I didn't list here that I do have in my notes, I don't want to forget it. Also, another progress is recognition of the different supports our students need and the mental health supports that are needed, the social workers that we need in our schools, the counselors that we need in our schools. And it's just a wider recognition of how important that is for our kids also. Again, we've got a long way to go there, but still, people are understanding those needs better. And so we do need to do some more, certainly raising that minimum pay for our ESPs. Those are the education support professionals, the ed techs, the food service workers, the bus drivers, et cetera. Many folks there in our schools. Address that teacher pay gap. Still some hopeful improvements to our pensions. Our dedicated retired educators, many of them are struggling. with what they do have in their pensions. Improvements to school facilities. So I don't know if you just heard on the news, but Bangor and Brewer are using some of the federal dollars to be improving the facilities and the air quality in their schools, the HVAC systems. Until COVID hit, I didn't know anything about HVAC systems. Now I know about MERV ratings and all sorts of things that I never thought I had to know. But you don't stop and think about that. But certainly a lot of our facilities are much older and need improvements. And so it's great to see schools that are using the funds for that. We need to continue that 55% state funding. Free school meals, need to continue that. And at the federal level, we will keep pushing for full funding of the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. They're supposed to be funding it at 40%, and right now it's at 13%. And so our special ed students have many needs and there are costs there. And certainly we need to be working on the federal level on that, as well as that GPO-WEP, hopefully repeal. We do need to continue all those efforts to recruit educators to our profession, to retain the educators we have. We've been watching retirements. There weren't really many more retirements because of all the stress and work that folks have had, but there were a lot of people that just left the profession, even though they weren't retiring. And so again, that's work that remains to be done. And we need to diversify the educator workforce. So we have educators who don't reflect the diversity of the student population. And it does impact our students when they don't see themselves in our schools. And so there are efforts to also be sure that we're doing that and attracting a more diverse workforce to education and supporting them. So those are efforts that need to continue to meet the needs of our students, physical needs, the emotional, social, academic needs. I mentioned mental health needs. Those supports are absolutely things that need to continue. And the efforts to provide every single student in Maine with a safe and a just and an equitable school. And just a word about equality and equity. If you haven't seen something like this, I'm glad I added the slide in at the last minute. It's like people maybe haven't seen this, because yes, equality is great. And so you can see on the left, we have treated all 3 children equally, and yet not all 3 children can see over that fence and watch the game. In the middle, we have treated them equitably. And so the student that needs 2 boxes to stand on, not that I recommend that a small child stand on 2 boxes unless there's somebody nearby to catch them perhaps, but still, now they can all see the game. And yet the third slide, the systemic barrier has been removed. Now there is a fence that they can all see through. And so they all have equitable access to the same opportunities. And that's what we need to be doing for our students. So before March 2020, before the pandemic hit, a lot of educators were already working on some of these things, knowing that students needed to be learning social and emotional skills about relationships, about empathy, about self-awareness, self-regulation. So that work was already beginning. ACEs, there was already learning being done about adverse childhood experiences, that some of our children come to school having experienced various types of trauma, and what our schools need to do to recognize that and be able to educate our children better. So trauma sensitive and informed schools already, again, was work that was being done. Learning about cultural competence. So just because a child might be from a different culture doesn't mean that they're going to behave the same way that I do from my culture. And I need to understand that and just be able to educate that student better with that better understanding that I have. I am going over these very, very quickly. There's a whole lot more I could talk about here as well. So I'm glad to do that. But I do want to get to a chance to have you ask some questions as well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, we want to be sure our students are seeing themselves in our schools, in the materials we use, in our curriculum, so that they can relate and so that they feel valued That's so important. And a lot going on about anti-racist education, implicit bias, microaggressions. These are all things that we're already started on. And certainly we've learned a whole lot more in the last few years and the impact that this has on our students. I think it was around May of that 2020 that we started seeing the attacks. So there's misinformation, and now there's something called disinformation, which is false information that's intentionally spread to mislead and deceive people. I wonder each day, how did we get here? How did this happen? And I hope we can turn the clock back on this. So this is a quote right off of the National Education Association website. There's so much information there. It's open to the public. You can read lots of things about some of the things I'm talking about. But this is really, really troubling that there are so many states where there are state laws that have been passed that are restricting what I, as an educator, can say, can do, can teach. I need the flexibility to be able to teach the students that come into my classroom. And I cannot anticipate from one day to the next what question one of those children might ask me. And I need to adapt to their needs. And they're curious creatures, of course. Don't we want our children to be curious? And so, again, to be so restrictive in some of these laws that have passed in other states is making an educator so hesitant to speak and teach and fearful. They can lose their jobs. Some have because they've said the wrong thing and somehow that's taken out of context and questioned. You're left wondering, what can I say? What can't I say? You can't teach that way. Students can't learn that way, more importantly. So again, this is just efforts to chill instruction on racism, sexism, stoke discrimination against our LGBTQ students and staff. So unfortunately, repetition works. I'm a Spanish teacher. Repetition is part of what I do to teach Spanish. We repeat things and have students repeat them a lot. It really works. Unfortunately, when it's disinformation that's being repeated over and over again, people don't question it and they start to believe it. And that's what's happened and is causing great damage to our educators and, again, most of all, to our students. So there's a lot at stake on November 8th. We've already seen bills come to the legislature recently, one about teaching controversial subjects. You can't teach controversial subjects, excuse me. So I really wonder what you could teach. I mean, define controversial for me. What you find to be controversial, others might not. In any case, we've seen those bills already. And so they've gone nowhere. Again, because we have so many people in our legislature and in the Blaine House who support public education and know how important it is for our students. I don't want those other laws that have happened in other states coming to my state. There are polls that show that the majority of the public trusts our educators, knows that they are professionals, that they are experienced, that they have expertise, that they continue to learn to do our best for our students. That is exactly what each and every one does. These are some polls that you can take a look at if you like, that show that. There's one that I did put in the slides here. I don't know if you can see it, it's not too well, but I have a few paper copies as well. But who should have input into grade school curriculums? 86% in this poll, teachers. What should elected leaders focus on in our schools? 93%. Adequate funding. 93%. School safety. Right? So again, the majority is certainly still very supportive and knows what we do and trusts what our educators do and knows how important this is for our kids. So I borrowed this from the artist Charlie Hewitt. I remain very, very hopeful. As an educator, you have to be hopeful. That is what we do, right? We're optimistic. Oh, student didn't learn it yet, but I'll figure out another way to teach it and they'll learn it and we'll get them there. But you also need to be helpful. And that's why I'm hoping all of you listening, and again, once I've answered some of your questions here, I hope you will be helpful and show your support for public education and educators. Show up, speak up, vote for candidates who support public education and public educators. That is so very helpful and hopeful. That's the message. And with that, I'll stop sharing that and hope that that has helped a bit.
Thank you, Grace. So,
Come on, I'm a teacher. I want some questions. That's part of what I do. Or comment. Hopefully some of what I shared was helpful. I can, and others perhaps can chime in as well. So absolutely an honest and a complete education and an accurate education and being open about our past. And again, it's to build a better future. Can't change the past, but you certainly can learn from it. And so just even getting to school board meetings when you have the time and talking about the good things that are going on in the schools. So the good things far outweigh any of these criticisms. I know that people are very, very supportive of our schools, but a few very vocal people show up and that's what gets heard. And so again, that you want a complete curriculum with the arts, how important are the arts for our students and being sure that we are teaching a full diversity of the many important people in our history and in our literature and in the arts as well, and showing all of our students the beauty of the diverse world that we live in and learning from it so that they can appreciate one another. Those are just off the top of my head, not terribly eloquent perhaps, but I did just hear earlier this week, I was on there's a program called Building Bridges, which is a group that is trying to do just that, build bridges and have people on different sides of controversial topics talk and listen. I'm very willing to talk and listen. I was not getting much of a sense that there was a lot of listening, just a lot of repetition. Again, just highlighting the good things that you are seeing and hearing happening. That would be great. Thanks.
yeah, there's an awful lot of dis and misinformation out there.
I thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm wondering if you've ever had the opportunity to do this kind of presentation for Republican groups or any school boards or anything like that, just to present these facts. Thank you.
So I've not been invited by Republican groups. And just so you know, I mean, when we look at, we have a screening and endorsement process. We don't look at the party affiliation. We look at the answers to our questionnaires that are returned to us. And the questions are asking about public education. And so I haven't been invited to any of the groups. As far as to a school board, I do try. I don't usually get to the school board meeting in my area, but I at least get to watch it. By the time I get home, I get the last little bit of it and I'll try to catch it on the TV later. I try to listen into some, certainly our educators in their locals speak up, and I encourage them to do that. But unfortunately, what's happened now, and something I didn't mention yet, I said attacks on educators. Now they are very personal attacks on social media by some. And it's so hurtful, and it makes some of our educators understandably fearful. I had one person tell me, they feel like they've been vilified because they are doing the right thing and having a caring, inclusive, supportive, and learning environment for their students. And then to see something like what they saw on social media about them is just so hurtful. And so that makes it hard for our educators to speak up, but some do, and hopefully more will. And again, with your support, that makes that good too. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Again, I think I got a lot out of the talk. I appreciate it. And one of the things I'm interested in, and partially because I talk about it a little bit when I canvass, is the $40,000 minimum salary for teachers. What can we say, or what do we know about the impact, the actual impact? Is there been tracking of retention or making it easier for schools to be able to get good people as teachers? Do we have any data that we could cite?
No data yet. That's still a fairly recent change, and it takes time to, as far as retention goes, to negotiate contracts where that impact then is felt in other parts of a salary schedule, for example. So hopefully soon we'll see some improvement because of that. We may need to be doing something more than 40K, I'll just say. There are other ideas out there as well, but I think that a shorter answer is it takes time to see that is really helping to attract, but it certainly doesn't hurt, especially when we've got students that are coming out of our prep programs and starting off with some debt. That's a much better starting place to be for our educators.
All right, more questions in the room or on Zoom?
So it is our locally elected school boards that are in charge of what happens in schools. And so they provide the course of study in the schools that they are the boards for, that are in alignment with the Maine learning results, the standards. And so the teachers then, with those courses, design the lessons that are appropriate, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate for those subjects for their students. But it is really the charge of the local school boards to see what happens in the schools. And they are members of, those are residents in those communities, many of them parents of kids in the schools that are charged with that.
Hey, thanks for being here. School board, we spent our whole day up in Augusta at the MSBA conference, which was very good. But a lot of what we heard today was about, we already knew this, was about how scared educators are from the public and school board members at meetings, where we have a police officer usually at our meetings now, and we didn't used to have that. We usually were poorly attended, not very exciting. I don't know, good work got done, but it was uncontroversial. And now we haven't had too much trouble since the masking of last year. It's been fairly peaceful. But I do know that there are people out there that want to talk about critical race theory and the woke agenda. It hasn't been terrible, but I think people need to know that this disinformation is actually dangerous, and it is causing the system to suffer. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the Republicans keep saying it's terrible and making it so awkward and uncomfortable for everybody, it is only going to get worse. It's going to cause, I mean, you already said all this stuff, but this is terrible. This is terrible for our public school system, and people need to knock it off as soon as possible. I know it's an election year, and hopefully we'll get some respite from this in the next year, but we know after that, if the trends continue, this is only going to ramp up, and we need some solutions to fight this. I mean, there's some good people here talking about it and on the Zoom, but we need to amplify the anti-rhetoric, I guess. Is there a way you can think of that we can discuss this with the public without appearing to be so defensive about it? We need to go on the offense and correct this soon, very soon, because this could really get out of hand
So,
quickly.
sorry, are you all set?
Thank you. Yeah.
No, thank you for being on a school board, both of you back there as well. So, the public comes to the school board meetings. It is good that people are attending them more and being more involved, and that's good. But I do believe this has just been so politically motivated by most of those that are speaking and saying some of these things. And then others believe it because they've heard it said and don't really ask. And I mean, when did we ever have to have fact checkers so frequently and verify, every day in the news and and all? It just seems really strange to me, but there we are. So to talk about what you do provide for students, and a lot of school boards are stepping up and doing that as well. You're reviewing these policies that are there. That is, again, a charge of the locally elected school boards to have policies in place that are providing the education that our students deserve.
It's one of the reasons why we're in the predicament we are in this country is a lack of basic understanding on the part of citizens as to how the government works. How do we make laws? How do we on the local and national level? I'm talking about the institution of civics, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on how we could instill that sense of knowledge on the part of students, and also inject civics more into the curriculum.
So we don't usually weigh into deciding, what should be and shouldn't be included in curriculum. Again, that's local school boards. There certainly are standards about teaching about government in the learning results. I can't quote them off the top of my head. That's not my subject area. But just talking to neighbors and family and having conversations. What I mentioned before about that program Building Bridges. I mean, let's be talking openly about it and be open to listening to one another. And I'm always going to be hopeful that we will get there. But it's really hard when that disinformation is just getting repeated in so many different ways over and over again. And so push back and question, well, why do you say that? What evidence do you have that that's happening? Because there is none. So hopefully keeping those dialogues open will help.
So just a quick comment. Clearly there are, Fox News and other damaging channels of misinformation that have people's ears, and they're out there telling those things all the time. So we need to fill the void that exists between school boards and schools and their community, because it's never been necessary before to have conversations larger and more in your face than teachers and other educators communicating with parents and communicating with children over what's happening in their school for their child and what's needed. Now we've got this other disinformation to counter. So perhaps we need to, in non-campaign season, be creating forums and opportunities for discussing with educators what's going on in the school, what's not going on in the school, educating the general public by filling that void about what really is going on, and how you elect school board members. So why show up at the school board and say we're being disenfranchised because you're not allowing me to sit here and insult and harass the people making the decisions, the superintendents and the teachers as well, claiming that they have no voice. And of course you have a voice. You get to elect the select board members. You get to go talk to the teacher that's educating your child. So I think we need to do work on that, and maybe some other key disinformation topics and areas in the off season, so that the disinformation doesn't get such a foothold. We've got some more questions in the room. So I'll hand the mic over.
When we start the new legislative session, there are going to be bills introduced, some good, some bad. And there are a number of members in our committee, our county committee who are activists. I am one. And we really, really, really like to be able to push for those good laws, to encourage people to submit public testimony, to be in touch with their legislators. And it would be really helpful if there was a public facing document of some kind that's plain language that says these are our top priority bills for this year and here's how you can help. And I don't know if you have the capacity to do that within your communication staff or not. I have no idea, but I know that in the past there have been pieces of legislation that I have supported and I got the information from somewhere. I always assumed it came, you know, from the Maine Education Association or something, but I just wondered if the public facing piece could be a possibility.
Well, there is a good amount that's on our website and also on the NEA website, and you can see a lot of the issues there. For the NEA, it would be the federal issues. I'm not sure that that's something that is really within our purview to be doing as an association. We exist because of our members and for our members. But I do talk to non-members if I get a question. You know, it's not that I don't talk to other people, and maybe we can encourage more of our educators to be reaching out in their communities with what we are communicating with them. So again, I'm not sure that that's the best answer in the world. That's off the top of my head. I will certainly do some thinking about that on my ride home and see what more we can be doing to be moving good things forward again for our students. That is what has to be at the core of all of this. That's why we do what we do.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone on Zoom? Don't see any hands raised. All right, we have one in the room. Hang on.
Want to piggyback on what my husband said about civics. Because it seems that this is a core of education. And I think we're seeing the results of not having enough understanding of civics in things like January 6th and the misunderstanding of the way democracy works. Because I was an educator, so I know dealing with curriculum. You teach your children how to think critically. Critical thinking, very important. But one of the problems we seem to have across the country is that we're teaching history, but we're not teaching civics. Civics programs have been in decline. And I know that Sandra Day O'Connor has a program called iCivics. Do you know about that?
That sounds really familiar. I'm sure I've seen it.
It's available to any school systems who would like to use it for free.
I'm not that familiar with that content area, but we have teachers that teach government. And so that's a part of that, but I'm gonna have to go home and look up the learning results and see what the standards are in that content area and be a little clearer about it. It's been a while since I've read them all. To be perfectly honest, I have read them all, but it's been a while. And so I'll look into that. As far as a citizen, well, sometimes what happens is you go to your representative in the legislature and you ask them to submit a bill that would require this, that, and the other. Again, if it's already there and there's a way that it needs to be given more attention, I don't suggest that it needs a bill in the legislature, but if it's not, if it's some other content area, for example, Wabanaki studies, there's been law that that's supposed to be being taught in our schools, and it's not quite all there yet, but it's being worked on. In some places it is. And so there's, you know, some changes don't happen very, very quickly, I realize too, but so that is a way that started to happen, was through legislation saying schools need to do this. So again, that's one path, but I'll have to look into it more to be able to give you a better answer than I just did.
All right. Any last question from someone on Zoom? All right. Seeing none, I think we've gotten everybody most urgent concerns addressed. Thank you very much, Grace.
Sure thing.
And I
Absolutely.
appreciate your
Thank
coming,
you.
talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. It's been a good conversation.
clearly we have a lot of work to do, and we've heard a number of ideas on how we can make a difference, not in just the campaign season, trying to elect people that are pro-education and pro-educators, but also
I appreciate this. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you all. I hope it's been helpful. Glad to do more of it.
thank you very much. A round of applause, please.